Well, good morning and welcome to the Washington Student Achievement Council's Spring Training Webinar Series, coming live from the offices here in Olympia, where just a few of us are today. Just really want to thank you all for joining us. I'm Becky Thompson. I serve in the role of Director of Student Financial Assistance here at the Student Achievement Council. And with me, Carla Idle-Corwin, who will also be co-presenting today. During this session, what we will be covering is the financial aid legislation from the 2020 session, as well as guidance related to Washington College Grant, the College Bound Scholarship for the 2021 academic year, and then a brief discussion about participation agreements for you all. To let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards on our website in the Financial Aid Administrator section. Please note that you are all muted. I wish that I could hear your voices or even see your faces right now, but I think we're at, I don't know, 231 of you, and we decided that maybe that might be just a little bit of background noise. So you all are muted. Keep in mind, though, that you can submit questions, and we encourage you to do that along the way if, in fact, you have a question. Carla and I will not see them. We are very thankful today that we have a few moderators working in the background to look through those questions, and we'll take a few moments, some pauses throughout the presentation to check in on questions. So feel free to send them in, and we will answer just as many as we can. If we don't get to all of them, please know that we will follow up with you directly afterwards. I wanted to let you know that in your control panel or sort of through the webinar technology, you should see two handouts in case they're helpful to you. One is the slides that we will show, and we will be showing those slides here shortly on the screen, as well as the 2021 final Washington College Grant and College Bound Scholarship Award chart that we distributed also through email on Friday. So that's the same one. So with that said, I'm going to move over to the PowerPoint slides, probably turn off the webcam for now, but we will be back as we answer some questions. Okay, so I mentioned what we were going to cover, but let me just talk for a minute about the order. So we'll start with legislative update. I'm then going to pass it over to Carla, who will talk about the Washington College Grant and College Bound Scholarship. Then we'll check in on participation renewal process, mention a few of the initiatives going on here at the Student Achievement Council, and should have time also for some additional questions at the end. Note that this looks a little bit different. Of course, we're coming from you through webinar, but we've also, what normally would be done probably in person over the course of a day, we are splitting up through various different webinars over the next, today and then the next 2 days. So we'll show you that schedule at the end of the session. I know many of you are already signed up for many of the other webinars to come. Okay, so just quickly in terms of the Student Achievement Council as a whole, for those that might be new, and even those that are not new, there are a few new members to our 9-member council. We were happy to welcome a brand new chair, Jeff Benson, who joined the council, as well as Superintendent Chris Reichdahl, who has joined, and our newest member, Sativa Jones, coming to us from the Highline Public Schools. So we're very happy and thankful for their leadership in the work. I do want to turn the camera off. Thank you, Carla. You guys don't need to see me. All right. in terms of what we do, we're going to talk about the state financial aid programs today, but know that the work of the Student Achievement Council is broader, including proposing goals to the governor and the legislature, and advocating for strategies and resources needed for that. And I think that in some ways you should see that show up in our work related to financial aid. What are Washington's attainment goals? Those of you probably know it by heart, most of you. By 2023, 100% of high school diplomas or equivalent, as well as 70% post-secondary credential. We, you know, through that, really believe that the state financial aid programs play a role in meeting those goals, that really it takes, you know, post-secondary education to be affordable. But also one of the things that we've really been working towards this past year in terms of talking about our work is using a strategic framework. So yes, affordability, yes, state financial aid programs, but also ensuring that there's a supportive environment in which students you know, can pursue their credential, that looks at enrollment, completion, and student supports, including basic supports for basic need support. And through it all, ensuring that we are addressing equity all along the way. I won't go through this, but just to give you a sense that you can look at it later for your reference, the work and the duties of the Student Achievement Council, including financial aid administration. All right, so let's dig into the legislative session and update. So the 2020 legislative session did end on March 12th, and it was a short session, meaning typically with a short session, there really is not big initiatives that are necessarily brought on. The short session really means like looking at the budget, making some adjustments if needed. That said, there were quite a few bills that were heard related to state financial aid and post-secondary education. It did end on time, but as it was starting to wrap up, especially that last couple weeks of the session, COVID-19 was starting to spread in Washington, and it started to be you know, discussed. That said, the session did end on March 12th. Typically, and this was also true this year, the governor then has time to look at a budget and before he signs and it becomes law. And he did take that time this year. And I think from his perspective, as he mentioned in his press conference, really had to make some very hard decisions. And he ended up doing some vetoes on some budget line items that included some policy work that was assigned to the Student Achievement Council. However, all of the new financial aid programs that had made their way through the session, through the legislature, and were assigned to the Student Achievement Council remain. And we will be discussing those today. The one thing that I will mention here is that the Washington College grant, specifically the guaranteed funding, was not passed in 2020. You might recall that legislation really happened in 2019, but a big, large amount of money is reserved and was in the budget for the increase for this coming academic year. And so at the signing of the budget, the governor was asked about whether or not Washington College grant and the expansion would remain. And his chief of staff confirmed that it does become an entitlement on July 1st. So, you know, that legislation passed in 2019. That is the law. and it was confirmed also through the governor's press conference. Just for your reference, the bill number here, 6168, is where you can find the budget bill, the supplemental operating appropriation. So there's really three places in which there's a connection to state financial assistance coming through the legislative work. I'm going to start with the Washington National Guard grant. This is not necessarily a new program. What it is, it was in existence. It was being administered by the Washington Military Department. That transfer will take place now to the Student Achievement Council this summer. This is a conditional grant program, and just in terms of some context, we're seeing several of these conditional grant programs come into kind of the state aid portfolio. And I'll talk in a minute about another one, which is for educators or for teachers that passed in 2019. But in general, conditional grant programs mean that there is financial aid that is offered to recipients that help them pay for their post-secondary costs, and they are then agreeing to some sort of service in exchange. In this case, 1 year of funding will mean that they need to serve in the National Guard for 1 year. In exchange, and if they do not do that, then it becomes similar to the terms of a federal student loan. Some highlights about the eligibility for this program include needing to be a member of the Washington National Guard, attending an approved college. There is going to need to be some work around sort of the language about the approved college. Specifically, the legislation mentions accreditation body as well as colleges that are approved for the Montgomery GI Bill. So we will likely address this in rulemaking in terms of who's an approved college for this program. Recipients need to be a Washington resident. They need to not have already earned a baccalaureate degree, and they need to submit a FAFSA or a WASFA. There is not a need-based component to this program, although there is this requirement to submit an application to ensure that recipients are receiving all the other federal and state aid that they can receive before really being considered for this program. The maximum award, and I'm going to kind of point this out because I think it's important to understand sort of what the maximum award would look like. And that is that it takes a look at tuition and fees. There is some language about for schools that would be private colleges that not being more than the highest research public institution amount. So we would look at tuition and fees, then we would subtract out any federal and state grant aid and add $500 for books. So if you start to think about what this math looks like, you will know that students that are receiving a maximum Washington College grant would likely only be eligible for the $500 book amount. A student who is a college-bound scholar would likely not be eligible for any dollars through this program. The military department does have a role, even though we're transferring the administration over to the Washington Student Achievement Council. They have a role in setting the awarding priorities as there are limited dollars. So we have not met with them yet to start to work on this transition, but will be doing so in about a couple weeks, and to start to talk a little bit about what the awarding priorities might be for this program. All right, the other student financial aid program that was passed in the 2020 legislative session is the Undocumented Student Loan Program. And this is where I want to just kind of point out and be pretty clear about the very earliest this could go into effect. And that would be for the 21-22 academic year. So a year from now would be the very earliest. And for us to implement for that year, it's contingent upon private donations. So at the moment, there is, besides some setup costs and administrative, appropriation, what we do not have dollars to award to students or to loan to students in this program. It requires that private donations be made first, and that then the state can match funds up to $2 million for the biennium. So essentially kind of think around $1 million per year. The eligibility for this program, as it's stated in the statute, includes resident students with financial aid needing to submit a WSAC and not qualifying for federal financial aid. The maximum award, you will see that this seems familiar, very similar to the award calculation in what I just covered on the Washington National Guard program. And that is that it's public tuition and fees less state grant aid plus $500 for books. The difference between the value here and the value on the National Guard is the National Guard takes into consideration the federal aid. Obviously here, recipients would not be eligible to receive federal financial aid. So again, I think it's important to know that the students that this would be likely serving are students that would not be receiving the maximum Washington College Grant or College Bound Scholarship. This is a program in which we would be consulting with you all on the design. What are the terms and conditions of this program, and how to best administer it. So we will likely be picking this up first with our financial aid work group this coming fall. And at that point, we hope that we have a better sense of what the fundraising or what donations might look like for this program. All right, so moving along to the third financial aid related legislation from 2020. That is a bill that actually has 3 different parts to it with various different roles for the Student Achievement Council. I'm going to start with the financial aid calculator, in which we, the Student Achievement Council, are to create a Pell and Washington College Grant eligibility calculator. So I know many of you have something similar probably on your website, so you might have some good advice for us on this. What we hope that this calculator can do is really be used for early outreach to students that might, of all ages, that might be thinking about pursuing post-secondary and getting a sense of what they might be eligible for. As many of you know, that we have students that definitely underestimate what they're eligible for. We hope that this can be a tool for them to really get a sense that maybe I really should submit that FAFSA or a WSAC. So we, are working through kind of the implementation plan, but at the moment we are hopeful that we could actually launch this, at least a simplified version of this, by October 1st of this year, where we can then sort of align that with an opening of the new FAFSA WSAC cycle, application cycle. So more to come on that. And again, if you If you've done some of that work and have any hints and ideas for us, we would love to hear them. The second component to this legislation is consistent definitions for financial aid awards. So that language is coming from the legislation, but essentially, you know, I think there's a desire by the legislature in terms of when they were working on this bill is to have an environment in which students can really look and compare financial aid awards kind of apples to apples. I know that many of you already follow federal guidance in this area, and it could be that there already is quite a lot of consistent definitions, but we will definitely want to be taking a look at that. One of the things, the place we will start, just like with other things, is with the financial aid work group. As some of you on the line serve in that role, and those of you that don't serve in that role, you know, you're very, very well represented by that group. And so we will start there, and then we will absolutely be asking for broader feedback in this area. In terms of the timing, I just really want to point out that this is work that we will start to undertake likely this fall, but that really, when I look at and plan for like the timing of how this will work, I see this really being implemented for the 22-23 academic year award notifications. So for many of you, those you know, could be award notifications that you are really getting ready for and then implementing the end of next year of 2021. So we will begin that work so that you have plenty of time to implement it if there is any change that needs to happen with your award notifications. Finally, I would just mention that this bill requires high schools to provide a financial aid advising day. So most of this responsibility is, you know, by OSPI, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, as well as school districts. But Student Achievement Council has been asked and is required through the legislation to advise and provide information on Washington College Grant. Obviously something that we look forward to doing and think is very well connected to the work that we need to do in promoting state financial aid that's available to students. Okay, so you can't see this, but I need to take a drink of water. That really covers the three financial aid related pieces of legislation in 2020. Like I said, there was other work that was assigned to us, most of which was vetoed for understandable reasons, as you know, and work that is related to student support. So we'll see what we can do even without legislation. But at this point, those are the three main things in terms of responsibility for the Washington Student Achievement Council out of the legislative session. So I am going to spend just a few more minutes talking about legislation. And this looks like a little bit of going back in time. But I'm going to mention a few places in which there was work done in the 2019 legislative session that is getting implemented, continues to be implemented. So I will, Carla will be speaking really on the details related to the Washington College Grant expansion. But I just want to mention here that in 2019, when the Workforce Investment Act was passed, and as a quick reminder, that is where the legislation for Washington College Grant showed up and some of the funding of it, but also other types of supports for for post-secondary education. So some of the public colleges received dollars through this Workforce Investment Act. And some of that, some of that funding, or some of that funding was through that legislation coming through a brand new tax, business B&O tax. As we got into the 2020 legislative session, the revenue forecast indicated that that might not be enough to really cover it. And so the very first bill, I think, that was really signed by the governor this year was a change to really how that tax is assessed and for the Workforce Investment Act. So again, Carla will go into more details about the phasing in of that legislation. The other thing quickly I wanted to mention is that in 2019, there was a very large bill that really focused on teacher shortage. So this idea that we, in the state of Washington, we are facing a shortage of teachers. And so part of the bill included some financial aid programs to help with affordability of students that might be interested in pursuing education or becoming a teacher in the state of Washington. Most of these are conditional scholarships. So again, where they're receiving dollars to pursue different types of credentials and then agreeing to teach in the state of Washington, and if not, then those dollars become like a federal student loan or similar terms to a federal student loan. So we have been implementing these in various different phases. At the moment, you see the 5 names of programs under the first phase of implementation, and those really are now in various stages and at least are up and running on the application phase. What I will say is that there's a couple of these programs that will require some work with you all in confirming eligibility for these recipients. Some of them might look familiar because we had some funding for these programs a few years back, as at the time, one-time funding that then expired, and now they're sort of back. So we're bringing those programs back up into different phases of implementation. We still have some other work on the other 3 programs that this legislation created. So we are really doing these in priority order. And you can see that when you look at them, they're really meant to support different places along the teacher pipeline. So for example, paraeducators, those that maybe want to become a paraeducator, those that want to become a teacher, and then after teaching, or after their credential, folks that are in the classroom. That loan repayment is the last one here that we're looking to implement, really helping with folks on that side of loan on affordability after their credential is earned. So those were the things that I wanted to cover related to legislative session. I might just pause for a moment, and Victor or Gabi or Crystal, helping in the background, is there any questions that maybe I should address at the moment, or can they wait until later?
There's multiple questions regarding the undocumented student loan program. So if we're going to address that later in the presentation, we can wait on those.
I think we can probably address them, at least try to address a few of them right now. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first one came in is asking, is the maximum award for undocumented loan an annual max or quarterly max?
Yeah, so I would almost say it's sort of both, right? I mean, the annual, so a student who might be attending three terms 3/4, that is how that calculation would go. Maybe I'll go back to, let's see if I can go back to that page here. Oops. So this maximum award amount down here, if a student was only attending 1/4 or half a quarter, I mean, or that this award amount can be adjusted for whatever their enrollment was, but the calculation would remain, which is looking at the maximum being related to the tuition that would be charged at a public rate, less the state grant, and then adding the $500 for books. So Gabi, that sounded like your voice. Other questions on this?
Yes, the second one is, how soon can private donors give to the undocumented student loan program?
Probably tomorrow. There's no limitation on how soon we would start to be able to have conversations about donations. That is a role that we will need to play. One of the administrative requests that we've made is really, and we've never really had this in our office, in our agency, is someone that would be focused on fundraising. And so, we will likely not be actively, well, I know we won't actively be seeking out donations until we have a hire in place, and we cannot do that until starting July 1st of this year, 2020. So that's when we WSAC would start to actively seek out donations. But we are certainly able, anytime before that, to accept donations.
Okay, thank you. And a final question is kind of long, so we may want to address this after.
Sure.
Could it be possible with the 2020 Undocumented Student Loan Program to have a conversation of increasing the maximum amount to tuition and fees, as well as housing, as that is consistently what undocumented students struggle to cover, especially for schools who have live on requirements their first year, who live on campus on requirements their first year?
Yes, right. So thanks, Gabi, for that question. I think the thing I can address here, I think that in legislative session, when I was asked, I tried to point out, sort of what it might look like to a student, especially because I think some of the testimony was about, some of the other costs associated with, being able to pursue post-secondary, having other costs, all the things that you're talking about, room and board, living expenses. So at the moment, what it would take to change this maximum award, I guess, is the point here, is that it would take legislative action. This maximum award is in the statute, it is in the law, and so that means that legislative action would need to change it. So I absolutely hear that question. I think I tried to describe throughout session, when asked, what this might look like to a student, and that as it's written, anyone at full eligibility of Washington College grant would only really be able to borrow that $500. So I hear it, and I think it could be that as it goes along, others might, I think that we will continue, I think, to try to express the need for students to be able to pursue, and for it to be affordable.
Okay, thank you, Becky. I do have one last question on undocumented, if you have the moment.
Yeah.
Are schools going to be held to a default rate for undocumented loan program?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, these are the things that would really need to be worked on, where we talk here on the slide about consulting with the design. So I'm personally not envisioning sort of that at the moment. The legislation does not require that be done, but the Student Achievement Council does have rulemaking authority on this program, and there's quite a few places in which we do have to create rule for, and so it would be, involved in those discussions related to the design of the program. But at the moment, I don't envision that being something that takes place. The legislation does not require it. The legislation does, I think, talk a little bit about determining fees and language around interest rates, et cetera, but there's no discussion at all about cohort default rate. So those are good questions. All right, so with that said, and we can come back to questions if folks have some later about the legislation. So we're going to move forward, and I'm going to pass it on to Carla.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm going to be highlighting our favorite program, the Washington College Grant. I guess I should say that's my favorite program because it reaches the most citizens in the state of Washington. As you know, in 2019, the program was expanded, and there were 2 layers of implementation to that. As we're coming up on the 2020-21 academic year, the big expansion is to include apprenticeships that will afford the citizens of Washington to pursue more than college. So we've heard repeatedly that college isn't for everyone, but that there are very viable professions that students can or that participants can access. And so, as you know, it's more money to more people, more students for pursuing education, or for more participants pursuing apprenticeships. And the range is out there, and in a few slides, I'm going to give you some comparisons of what's new versus what's the same. One of the first pieces has to do with money, and we've had a lot of questions related to this. And as you can see, there has been a significant funding increase for the Washington College Grant Program that is intended for the 2020-21 academic year. The other programs that are listed off to the right, as you can see, there are either decreases or funding is predicted and projected to be flat. So this is good news in that it's going to result in students being able to receive the funds and not have unserved students in the Washington College Grant Program. The slide in front of you now kind of shows what's the same and what's new, and you're looking at some of those probably thinking, well, why is that listed twice? So as you know, it's a 2-year phase-in, and the median family income will expand to 100% starting July 1. And the guaranteed funding in the program means that it is like an entitlement, except that the student must have need and they cannot receive Washington College Grant in excess of need. That is one question that we have had a great number of times, even in the current academic year. So keep that in mind. And a couple of other pieces, the 8 eligible programs that have been around, 8 eligible apprenticeship programs that have been in place for a long time. Actually, I'm talking over a decade at least, that exist on many of the college campuses or in partnership with colleges. Those remain eligible for regular Washington College Grant if they are considered an 8 eligible program and meet the requirements of the credits and the duration, etc. That's not going to change. What is going to change is that it now is open, it will be open July 1 for registered apprenticeships to be considered eligible, and those programs will apply to participate parallel to how our institutions apply to participate. And so that will open up opportunities for additional citizens to be able to pursue apprenticeships. The apprenticeship programs do have to be approved by the Washington State Apprenticeship Training Council, and that is a very rigorous process from what I understand, so they are well vetted. And we'll be working closely with Labor and Industries, who oversees that, as well as members of the Washington State Apprenticeship Training Council. In terms of money, you will no longer receive allocations for 2021. So it's going to feel and look a lot like how College Bound has functioned for you for the last several years. So it's not going to be the fair share model and that whole calculation. What's the same and what's new? With the removal of the limitation of the second associate's degree for the 2019-20 academic year, we just want to remind everyone that there's a 5-year maximum usage limit. So that is inclusive of apprenticeship time as well as time on a campus. And so we will be converting apprenticeship hours into QERs, a terminology that's probably very familiar to most of you. And so it is a combined lifetime limit of 5 years. College Bound is still around and a very viable program that we have had a lot of questions where people are like, well, is College Bound, does it still really apply? It absolutely does, because it provides that small book allowance that is in addition to the Washington College Grant. And College Bound eligible students that receive, they receive College Bound up to 65% and are eligible for WSAC up to 100% MFI starting July 1. The one key factor I wanted to point out that we're starting to see in the interims that just were submitted last week has to do with the order of awarding for Washington College Grant versus for those students who are passport eligible and College Bound eligible. So a reminder that you want to award Washington College Grant and passport first, and then if they have the remaining need, unmet need, then College Bound comes into play. We're seeing a few instances, quite a few actually, where students are being awarded WCG and CBS and not their passport, and then by the time the college is retroactively trying to go back and award, the student may have withdrawn, and upfront funding may be the persistence factor, the tipping point for those students with their passport money. The maximum award amounts, as you know, are increasing. You have the new chart in your hands, I hope. And again, we continue to receive questions about, well, if it's an entitlement, do they have to have unmet need? And the answer is absolutely yes, they must have unmet need. And even in the 2019-20 academic year, we are seeing a number of students where they have received scholarships that have put them over the threshold and they have no unmet need, which means they don't receive WCG. However, you can report them as full need met, so that way we know they're not technically unserved even in the current year. You were given a handout at the beginning of this session that is this chart. I realize it's probably hard on your eyes to try to look at it, but it's also posted on our website in the program manual and in the appendix of the program manual. So a couple of different places for you to access it depending on what size print you want. There's some changes and exciting changes for 2021 with regards to the income cutoffs. As you can see, some things are the same. Everybody gets it at 0 to 50%, at 100%, but there's a new change coming where you get it up to 55% at 100%. You get 100% award at up to 55% MFI starting for 2021. And students are eligible for prorated awards all the way up to the 100% median family income. And so goal is to serve more of our lower income and middle income families and help them with their educational costs. This, the Washington Administrative Code is, as you know, a very important part of implementing new legislation when it is passed. And I want to say a big thank you to all of you that took the time to provide input. I think we went through 4, maybe 5 different versions with many of you taking the time to provide critical feedback so that we could make informed and intentional language adjustments to the proposed WAC. And so kudos to all of you and a deep gratitude from me to all of you for doing that. Our intention is that the former state need grant WAC will be repealed and that the new Washington College grant will be adopted on May 29th, and it becomes effective 31 days later. And this new WAC is broken into 2 different sections to help distinguish, okay, this is Washington College grant for colleges, and this is Washington College grant for apprenticeships. And so you'll hear us say WCGA. That means it's for the apprenticeship programs that become eligible starting 2021. So there are some sections and definitions that apply to both in the proposed WAC, and so it is available. Also, you can link to it from our website or from the Code Revisor's office if you are curious and would like to do some light reading in your spare time. We have 17 days to go until adoption, and I have to tell all of you, it has felt like much like shepherding a child through the process. So it's been a phenomenal experience. In terms of operations, even though the program becomes guaranteed funding, we have continued having you report quarterly, and we'll ask that you continue to do that. And the reason for that is we are trying our best to provide quality data so that the Caseload Forecast Council and others involved can look at their predictive models to try to figure out what is the cost of this really going to be, what are we seeing in terms of enrollment trends. And so in terms of how the funding and reporting will look and feel for you on the campus level, it's going to be very comparable to the College Bound Scholarship. And you'll be reporting that through the Seesaw system. And so we just ask that you please complete your monthly reconciliations, submit your payment data and your quarterly reports on time, because that data is really driving a lot of informed decisions, especially in this first year of it becoming an entitlement. It will become that much more critical. This slide is not updated yet because we are still active in the 1920 academic year. But as expected, I was peeking at some reports earlier this morning, and the number of unserved students, as expected, is decreasing. And that's in part because of the increased funding that we've received over the last couple of years. We do still have unserved students, however, in the 1920, but anticipate that for 2021, we will no longer see that unserved gap. We will update this chart once we have completed the final interim in July, and it'll still probably be August before we're able to update that, but we do want you to know that it will be updated so that you can see the progression over time. Some friendly reminders looking ahead. We have set the dates for the interim reports for the next academic year, but we are still working with many of you, with all of you actually in the current academic year, but there are a few schools who have had some difficulty given the current climate that we're in completing their most recent spring interim report that was due last week. And so we are working with them directly to wrap up the final changes there. I have noticed that there are some institutions that are reporting utilization of less than 80% of their funding. And I'm not sure if that's due to enrollment changes or if there's a lag in some of their reporting. And so once all the schools have been finalized, we will be looking at the data and maybe reaching out to some of you. if you know that you need to deobligate funds, please don't wait for us to ask you to do it. If you know that your enrollment patterns and the decisions made at the campus level regarding the remainder of the academic year are going to drive an under expenditure in your program, please let us know that you would like to deobligate so that we can redistribute that to other needy students, because we do have unserved students in our state. Just a reminder, wrapping up 1920, we are anticipating a July 6th due, or the due date is July 6th. We are looking at you to make sure that you wrap up all of the parts, including returning funds if that applies. And if you're a summer one school, remember that until your final interim is complete and approved and all funds have been either sent from us to you or from you to us in a due to due from situation, you are not able to request 2021 funds until that has occurred. And so in addition, you'll need to be make sure your institution has completed the new program participation agreement requirements that Becky actually will be covering in a little more detail shortly. We have made some changes and are in the process actually of making changes to the Seesaw dashboards that you all are familiar with. And one of the most exciting pieces has to do with the fact that you'll be able to see Passport on the same dashboard as Washington College Grant and College Bound. And so that's pretty exciting. And you'll notice that there are no unserved students anymore. And so this will be the 2021, this is a draft dashboard. Like I said, we are still working with our IT developers who are fast, quickly programming all the changes that we keep giving them. One of the things you'll see will be changes in your draft totals. And so you see served awards and then need met awards. So the need met awards are those ones I was mentioning earlier where maybe the student has received scholarships or other funds. So even though they are eligible, their full need has been met. And so you still report them so they don't appear to be unserved. And the last piece is the unit record reporting timeline. And so we do have the August training schedule, webinars scheduled and are planned. And it will be, our goal is to release the unit record manual hopefully by June 1st or right in that window of time to get as much advance notice out to you as possible. There have been some file record layout changes that we need to make sure you all have incorporated. We've communicated those over the past year, but just want to make sure that those are out there. And I think that concludes my comments. And now I'll turn it back over to Becky to talk about program participation.
Sure. So this will be quick and we'll start to want to get close to more questions here in a minute. But I first want to just begin by always in these workshops wanting to let you all know sort of what we see essentially in the pipeline of who, if there's new colleges that might be interested in applying to participate. This, of course, in the past was important as we brought new schools on that could impact allocations in state need, what has been state need grant. So we did bring on a new institution, Seattle Film Institution, for the 2019-20 academic year. So I don't know if we have anyone from Seattle Film Institute on the line, but again, welcome to the state aid, to state aid. At the moment, we do not have any pending applications for the 2021 academic year. So typically, just keep in mind that an application process for an institution post-secondary, so college or institution, can take a while. It can take up to a year. Depends on the timing of that application coming in, because we do need to be able to collect information to make a determination about whether or not there's administrative capability to participate, as well as then being able to get estimates that can be passed along to the Caseload Forecast Council related to funding forecasts for the program. So although no colleges, as Carla mentioned, we will be running essentially a parallel process in which registered apprenticeship programs, so that's not you all, forgive me for that. I think my piece of paper hit a slide here. Sometimes I think I can talk and click at the same time, but I'm not sure I can. So I'm just going to take a moment to get back to the slide. Sorry about that. So we will be running a parallel process for apprenticeship programs wanting to participate. So as Carla mentioned, this is different than apprenticeship programs that might be on community and technical college campuses, in which some supplemental instruction is happening through a partnership with an apprenticeship program. You will not be awarding those students, but you may be awarding students in which you have an apprenticeship program that meets eligibility criteria for the Washington College grant, as it has in the past. So I'm giving a little bit of a sneak preview. Some of you might be also registered for the session that we're going to be doing tomorrow, that will cover this at a high level, but giving you a sense of how Washington College grant for apprenticeship will work. All right, so you all do need to renew your state aid participation on an annual basis. One of the things we looked at when we were looking to renew the Washington Administrative Code, or the program rules associated with the Washington College grant that Carla mentioned, is to take a fresh look at what we ask for, when, by who, etc. So there are changes in that proposed administrative code that will be going into effect for the 2021 academic year. And like Carla, I too want to express my gratitude to the work group and then you all as a whole in providing input on this. This is one of these areas in which we are making an adjustment for, in some cases, not for all colleges, but in some cases, this is likely very much in alignment with sort of the sector that your college is in. So Jeffrey Powell from our office has sent now everyone an email indicating what's required of you to renew your participation. Some of it will just be submitting a certification form that you are in compliance, and in other cases you will need to provide some documentation. We are asking for those to be submitted the week of June 1st, and we will do all that we can to ensure that your renewal is up to date by July 1st of 2020, assuming we have the documentation that we need from you. Some of you may recall that sometimes we need to ask for some additional clarification. But we do renew on an academic year basis. So even if the renewal goes past July 1 because we're working through it, the eligibility is really for the full academic year and your participation in the full academic year. Quickly, I just wanted to point out a couple initiatives that I think are worth mentioning because they likely align with maybe some of the work that you're doing on your own campuses. And I wanted to start with Aim Higher Washington. This is an initiative that I might have mentioned throughout the year if you've been to some of our other trainings. But we really felt like there's a very large opportunity here, as we knew that the expansion of Washington College grant would be coming into effect this coming academic year. And we also knew that Washington, when you look nationally, is one of the states that has one of the the not so good FAFSA filing rates, meaning when you look at this measurement tends to look at a high school graduating class, but that we have been, 47th, 49th, 40, right in that area for many, many years. And we want to really move the needle in terms of getting additional financial aid applications, so FAFSA and WASFAs, in for students. Not to just sort of because we want to increase our rating. That really isn't the reason. That's just a measurement of sort of where our progress is and which direction it's going. It's really about the fact that there's a disconnect when we look at that indicator, in that the state of Washington really has one of the most kind of generous state financial aid programs, and yet why do we have such a low FAFSA rate when you look nationally? So our colleagues here at the Student Achievement Council all throughout the agency have been a part of this initiative, as well as many of you all as well. And so this has a lot of different strategies. Let me tell you, we are trying all kinds of things this year. So we built on what had already been the 12th year campaign, again, that many of you all have supported by providing support or even hosting financial aid application filing, opportunities for prospective students. We are starting to now outreach directly to students and parents and local educators. We knew that this work had to be done in partnership, but thinking about you all, as well as expanding who else is maybe interested in this work, government leaders, other types of educators. And then also looking at where we have some digital tools. And we did start a texting campaign with our college-bound scholar seniors, in which it's using bot technology, in which this is not just messages going out from our office, but that students receiving those messages can ask financial aid questions back to the bot and get some answers. Our strategies were underway. We were realizing it's really to move sort of in the direction we want to move just takes a lot of support and a lot of work. I mean, we sort of knew that, and we're even really seeing it as we were working on those different strategies. And I will say that it became even more so true with COVID-19, in that much of the work that we were doing this past year was in partnership with our high schools. And so with them really needing to turn their attention to what distance learning might look like, how to ensure that students were getting fed, do they know where their students are? We have looked at different strategies of where we can partner and where we can go direct to students and parents. So for example, today there is an event in which some of the Student Achievement Council staff members are hosting what we're calling a town hall that is really a direct to students and parents in the Spokane area, in which questions can be asked in an interactive online session there. The other initiative I want to mention is College and Career Compass. This has been in the works for several years, in which we really knew that we needed to support adults that were looking to return and complete their education. And so it was built for that audience. It was built in partnership with many of you and other of your colleagues on campus, in which it was built to essentially pass along leads. If a student said, or a prospective adult student had said, I'm interested in nursing and I live in, the Spokane area. What are some programs, that could maybe work for me? That there's coding in the back that really matches that student up, and with their permission, it can take the next step of providing their information to that college, and that college, to participate in that way, has undergone an assessment to ensure that they are ready for adult students and to really be able to support some of those needs. So that tool does that. With the current health pandemic and thinking about our Aim Higher work that I just mentioned, we also realized that this could be an important digital tool in terms of career exploration also for high school students. And so there was quite a few folks here at the Student Achievement Council and with some partnership with you all to work on content that also makes this accessible and relevant to high school students as well. If you haven't already, I encourage you, any of you can really just go to compass.wa.gov and just play around with it, see what it looks like, and certainly encourage you if you feel it's appropriate to promote it to your prospective students. All right, so I won't go through these next slides except to say that they're for your reference in terms of good ways to get a hold of us. You'll see some of our emails. Just to mention that our program manuals are posted on our website. That's where you can get to the login for the portal. Some of our other websites, Ready, Set, Grad, and the WASH board. Here's just a quick look at what if you go to administration from our main menu and resources for financial aid administrators, that's where you will find the latest and greatest right here, 2021 program manual, as well as another copy of the chart that we provided to you today and on Friday. All right. So I am going to stop talking for a minute and turn to our moderators. I'm going to also turn off the PowerPoint. Well, before I do that, let me just mention, because I'm going to turn off the PowerPoint, turn back on the camera. But just keep in mind that we have quite a few other sessions coming up tomorrow and Thursday. And we hope that you can join us for those, and they will also be, just like this one, recorded and made available later, as it's possible that you might have some conflicts with some of these dates and times. All right, so moderators, as I get the camera back here, did that make everyone dizzy? I don't know. Do we have some questions to answer?
We do have a couple. The first one is, what apprenticeships will be included in the program?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the Washington College Grant Apprenticeship, so we're going to be calling it WCGA, it will really depend on the program providers and which ones apply to participate in the program. So what this means is that there's really no restriction on the type of apprenticeship that can be participating in the program. I'm guessing that we will see plumbers and electricians, and there's also some apprenticeships related to IT apprenticeships, etc. So the program itself, meaning the Washington College Grant Apprenticeship Program, doesn't limit sort of the types of apprenticeships. What does is that they have to first be registered and in good standing with the Apprenticeship Council that works through Labor and Industries. So they have to meet that bar first. And many of them already are. That's a long-standing, approved registered apprenticeship process. If they meet that bar, they then will be starting sometime later this month, be able to then apply to participate in Washington College Grant through an application of our office. And this is an area in which I'll go into more detail tomorrow during that session about the types of things that we will require of them. But it's very similar to what we require of you all, quite frankly, in terms of being able to administratively, you're administratively capable of, determining eligibility, being able to disperse funds, being able to report to our office. So that's the high level answer.
Thank you. Next question. is you're asking for quarterly reporting, but does this mean that the real-time reporting will be eliminated in order to draw funds, assuming quarterly reporting is interim reporting?
So, real time still absolutely will exist. So that's how you will draw, when you have eligible students and you want to submit those for payments to our office, you do that, and that will continue in the same way that it has. Quarterly reporting is sort of the language about interim reporting. It pretty much is that's being used interchangeably here. In a lot of ways, though, we hope that will be, you can tell us once we get it underway, but that it will be less work because sometimes in interim reporting, you're kind of trying to clean up those unserved students, looking at those edits, etc. And so while you are going to need to say, yes, this is accurate as of this date, so it is interim, but you would have been able to make payment requests all the way along. Carla, anything you would add to that?
Nope, that captures it.
Other questions, Gabi?
Not at the moment. So if anybody has any, please go ahead and enter them and we'll be happy to address them.
We'll just give it another minute or so. Well, Gabi, can you tell if anyone's typing?
I cannot tell, but I do not have any new questions.
Okay. Well, on behalf of Carla and me, and I just really want to thank the Student Achievement Council team that are working behind the scenes who have spent the last week trying to work on this technology to make sure that we're in good shape to do the delivery in this way. I do miss, as I mentioned earlier, all of your faces, the ability typically through this time to be able to get out to campuses. But know that we are here. We want to be supportive, as we know that you all are just have a tremendous amount of workload on your shoulders right now, trying to serve students in the best way possible under very difficult circumstances. So we appreciate very much you taking the time today to spend with us. And I would say that as questions come up, as you might need some training, etc., never ever hesitate to reach out to our office. That said, we'll close it up for today and hope to see you or have you participate, I should say, in the next few series of webinars over the next couple days. Thanks so much.
Thank you.